I'm David Loomis, Emeritus Professor of Journalism at Indiana University of Pennsylvania and editor of the HawkEye, an online, non-commercial, nonprofit newspaper based in and focused on Indiana County, Pennsylvania. In this year, the Woman 2.0, two 2018 candidates for state and federal legislative seats to represent Indiana County, among others, are here to discuss the fall campaigns and what they might tell us about 2019, a local election year, and beyond. Our guests today, 1 month and 1 day after the November election, are two Democrats. Susan Boser of Indiana, first-time candidate for the redrawn 15th Congressional District, seat held by incumbent 5-term Republican Glenn Thompson of Brookville. Boser is a professor of sociology at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Kerith Strano Taylor of Brookville, candidate for the 66th State Legislative District seat held by incumbent Republican Chris Dush. In 2016 and 2014, she ran unsuccessfully for the U.S. congressional seat held by Representative Thompson. She is an attorney in Brookville. Republican Jim Struzzi of Indiana won the election to fill a state legislative seat vacated by State Representative Dave Reed, Republican of Indiana. Here's what he said in response to a question about the 2018 election returns in Indiana County. Quote, "I think the results show that people like the direction we are moving in." Professor Boser's and Ms. Strano Taylor's Republican incumbents won by wide margins. Not so elsewhere. A little background for today's discussion. The so-called pink wave of 2018 was consequential. Donald Trump's 2016 election, Hillary Clinton's loss, the Women's March, the Me Too movement, and this year's record number of women candidates have reshaped the political landscape in Washington and in Harrisburg. Polling by the Center for American Women and Politics at Rutgers show that 55% of women, compared with 45% of men, preferred the Democratic candidate in their district. Pennsylvania, the largest state in the nation that did not have a woman in its congressional delegation, now has 4, all Democrats going to Washington. Soon women will make up 40% of House Democrats in 2019, but less than 7% of Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives. In Harrisburg, women's proportion of the Pennsylvania legislature will increase by 6%. Over time in Pennsylvania, the number of women elected on the Democratic side to the state legislature has doubled since 2000, and it went up by 15 just this year. Republicans, their numbers have increased by 5 in the past year, and their numbers have increased by 50% since 2000. Democrats are winning the competition for seats in the state legislature. So I turn now to questions from our guests today. Obviously, not every woman candidate won in this year of the woman. Did gender matter in Western Pennsylvania? If so, how and why? Susan, let's start with you. Did gender matter?
I think gender absolutely matters. And even as we're talking about, though, what happened in the rural parts of Western Pennsylvania, I want to put some context in that, because it almost could sound like women did well and Democrats did well in some parts of the state, but this just wasn't good. The context I want to bring out is that in 2010, Republicans targeted 5 states, Pennsylvania being one of them, to put in incredible resources. Red Map is what the plan was called, to focus on and turning seats, doing some redistricting as well in order to increase the number of Republican seats in Congress. Those resources were heavily concentrated in the rural areas. Okay, Democrats over the last 10 years have concentrated their resources in the urban areas, and that's also urban and suburban is where we saw the success in bringing in women and also flipping seats after the redistricting. But the area that we live in, and all of, with the exception of Pittsburgh, pretty much all of Western Pennsylvania, up through northern in particular, what they refer to as the T, is deeply, deeply Republican and has been the target of that kind of intensive funding. So what I want to say in light of that is that we actually did make movement. There was an increase in the percentage of Democrats that came out and vote, and there was actually a decrease in Republican votes as well. Now, we were coming from a long distance behind. I mean, this has been a 30-point Republican district for the last several years. So we made movement. We made movement. I'm looking at it kind of as elephant munching. You know, how do you eat an elephant? You take a bite at a time. We took a great big bite. and there are lots of really good things that are happening, which we can talk about. But I want to say that I believe it made all the difference in the world that a woman was running. I heard from countless women at events, in letters, in emails that said, I'm voting for you because it's time that we put a woman in office.
Kerith, gender, how did it work?
I don't know if I had the same experience in the smaller footprint that was the 66th district, which is all of Jefferson County and the northern third of Indiana. I definitely saw that enthusiasm in Indiana County. The demographics of those two populations are very, very different. When you talk about areas that are deeply, deeply red, Jefferson County is one of them.
Yes, it is.
And it's a very traditional thinking place. I think I don't believe that my gender hurt in the effort. I don't necessarily think it helped in the effort. I think it was a non-issue. I do believe, though, that it's important that we run. I think the statewide, if we look at the congressional districts, I think the redistricting had was a huge factor in winning the seats that we won. The fact that we were able to put as many women in were because women had stepped up to run before the redistricting even happened. I believe by the margins we would have seen those seats, some of those seats flip to Democrat, regardless of whether it was a woman running or not. I'm just overjoyed, and especially by the women that happened to make it in our delegation. They're amazing women who have a history of accomplishment through their careers. But when we run, even in seats where we aren't successful, we take money away from their efforts to run in seats where they were successful. So, some people say, why do you bother doing this? And if, you can't win if you don't play, firstly, but it's really important, number one, that people have a choice. Right? When people don't have a choice for whom to vote for, it kind of stops looking like a democracy and starts looking like something else. But also, it's important that we force the candidates and the incumbents to defend their seats, and they have to spend resources to do that. And when they're spending resources in Jefferson County, that's fewer resources that they have to spend in other places where we were able to pick up seats. So I think it's important across the state. We didn't challenge every seat this year on the state level. We ran more candidates than we had in 20 years before. So I think it's important. My goal would be that we're challenging every single seat, every single election, because until you're doing that, there are swaths of the population that just don't have a choice. And I don't think that serves the ideal.
So you're knocking on doors throughout all of your counties, and sometimes women answer the door. What feedback do you hear from your constituents, your female constituents, on the campaign trail this fall?
I mean, the one that sticks out in my mind was I knocked on an 80-year-old woman, Republican, registered Republican, and she answers the door. And, hi, my name is, I'd like to get to Harrisburg. And she says, oh, I'm just voting for women this year. And I said, well, do you want to talk politics? She says, nope, they've had their chance, right? So anecdotally, we've all had that experience. But we don't know if she actually voted. We don't know if she actually voted for only women. In our races, we were the only women for whom they could vote. I mean, the top of the ticket were two men. So anecdotally, you hear it, and it's wonderful, and it kind of girds you to go out and do more door knocking. But with the numbers that we saw in the 66, we don't know whether that really was borne out in the polling place.
In other words, you do not have exit polling that suggests that women voted?
We don't know that yet.
Okay. And will you?
Eventually, but it takes a long time to digest those numbers when the state party doesn't focus on digesting numbers at Jefferson and Indiana County. So it'll take us a little bit of time to be able to see if we had a higher turnout from women over men. We did something interesting. We did have an 8.7% increase in Democratic vote for the top of the ticket over 2016, which for us was very significant.
For Tom Wolf?
For Tom Wolf and Fetterman. And we had some Democrats that voted for Mr. Trump, a substantial enough number that caused us pause in 2016. So part of our effort with the state race and with Susan's race was talking to people, but getting them back into our fold and talking to them about why the Democratic Party represents them and will do better for them than the policies of the Republican Party. So we were really on pins and needles. Are we going to see that uptick? Because if it didn't, it would have been really disheartening that all this effort might have not been for naught. But 8.7% of people coming back into the fold was very, it was gratifying.
You were knocking on doors. What did you hear from women?
Absolutely. Well, again, as context, one of the things that was actually a little worrisome for me when I first started in the race back in February, in the northern counties in particular, I was warned when I showed up at Democratic meetings in 2 or 3 counties that the area was misogynistic and people would not vote for me because I was a woman and I was running against a man in the primary. And I remember once somebody telling me that when she was going, as a woman, going to get petitions signed, would go to different doors and would sometimes see a woman answering the door, and when asked to sign the petition, she would put her eyes down and say, "Just a minute, I have to ask my husband." Okay, that's not an uncommon experience that people asking to have petitions signed encountered. And so I was warned that it was going to be uphill for me running against a man. And yet the thing is that I did win the primary against a man in all of those areas, and I actually got 75% of the vote. So I did okay. And what I would see when I knocked on doors, it was the same thing Kerith was saying. There were a lot of women who said they would vote for me because I was a woman. I heard that frequently, and not as interested in policy issues. So I did hear that too. But the other thing, and it is anecdotal, but the other thing that I would stress too is that the organizers and those providing leadership in each of the counties, whether they were county affiliated or some of the grassroots groups that are out there, heavily women were involved in providing leadership in that. Here in Indiana County, it's very strongly dominated by women, and that wasn't the case just 2 years ago. So I do think that there's a lot more women energy, and a lot of times women will also cite their experience with the Women's March. I think I have one dear memory is going into a grassroots political group meeting in a church basement, and I was in a snowy February night, and I was greeted at the door by a woman wearing a pink pussy hat. And when I mentioned that I marched in Washington, there was lots of nods and enthusiasm. So that energy is present, and I don't have the numbers, to say what kind of role it made. But anecdotally, there was absolutely some different kind of energy that was in the field.
Yeah.
Can a Democrat win in this T, in this Western T, this Alabama of Pennsylvania? Can a Democrat win in 2020?
2020. First of all, I agree completely with what Kerith said about the importance of having somebody run. And I think in part, like in Indiana County, for example, the last 2 times I went to vote for a congressional representative, there was no Democratic name even on the ticket. So we're coming from a long ways behind. I think that we have building to do. And I think that we can do that. I believe that my campaign this last year did indeed help to build and strengthen. I think the work that Kerith has done that as well. And I think we'll continue to do that. I think that, so will we hit it in 2020 or not? I don't know. There's an awful lot of things that can change between now and then in terms of what's happening in DC right now, and many other things. But I do believe it's possible. I do believe it's possible.
What do you think?
I believe it's possible. I think it takes a commitment of resources on the statewide level that there's a reluctance to spend for a multitude of reasons. When I first ran in 2014, I literally was running because I was angry because Mr. Thompson couldn't answer my questions. So I wasn't coming into this with this history of political experience, and my experience over the last 4 years of working within the Democratic Party as it sits in Pennsylvania has been eye-opening, to say the least. Everybody recalls Howard Dean's 50-state strategy, right? He concentrated on spending money and resources in every single state, regardless of whether they were competitive or not. And it bore fruit. It worked. And then we got
Yeah.
lazy, right? And we stopped committing resources in that same way. This was the first year that, since I've been involved in politics, that I saw the Pennsylvania Party invest resources. But I believe not in the way that they need to be invested. They send out paid organizers. They pop up during a midterm election. They don't really have a connection to their area. They do great work, and we're grateful for them. I think I have this theory, whether it's ever going to work, but actually hiring part-time the organizers that are already here, the folks that are working on Indivisible, the folks that are known in their communities, to start doing the local work of statewide organizing and getting the tools that they need to do that. So we don't have a college student, who are wonderful, popping up 4 months before an election, knocking on random people's doors, right? I don't think they're taken as seriously as when it's the neighbor down the street or the lady on the PTA or someone that you know. And if that person had a team of people that was working every month, right, through the odd year elections, because judicials are so crucially important, I think we would start to see results, right, that we could start to rely on. And every year, right, the leadership of our party is from the urban areas in Pennsylvania. That's where the majority of the money that comes into the party is spent. So they, if Philly and Pittsburgh come out, we win the state. Well, that didn't happen in 2016.
Right.
So I hope that we learn from that, and we don't sit and get comfortable because we had this great result on the House level, that we could say, oh, well, Pennsylvania's now blue again.
Right.
Because it cannot stay that way if we don't commit and work in the areas that need to work.
Yeah, I agree completely with the point about the paid organizers that were disconnected. And they were good young people.
Great kids.
Liked them a lot, but coming in from the outside did present some challenges, and they didn't bring the level of credibility that would have been useful, especially in areas where it's small towns where people know each other and outsiders are often seen with some suspicion. It can make a difference if you're working with people that know the region. But there's another way too in which they could be different, could be useful. Early on, they have resources, they have data through Vote Builder, but they don't share those resources. We have to purchase them, and for a congressional campaign, that's $3 grand, which is a big thing when you're first getting started, but it's also critical to be able to get out into the field. And then in addition to that, when the paid organizers that they send in were collecting data from often our volunteers that were out and they were completing the information sheets, they were collecting data. The data then went back to Harrisburg, but we didn't have access to the data that our own volunteers had collected in the area. Now that changed later, I'm grateful to say, later in the process of the campaign, but for several months, we didn't have access to any of that information, and that could have made a difference. And those are things that wouldn't have cost them anything.
Let me ask you what voters told you mattered to them. I mean, I read that national Democrats, Tom Perez, for example, saying that Democrats should focus on key issues like infrastructure and health care and a select few talking points. Did those resonate among your prospective constituents? Did they give you feedback on other issues that mattered to them? What did the voters say mattered to them when you were talking to them?
Well, I certainly heard about health care. But in addition to that, one of the things that I heard quite a bit about was what it was taking people to simply keep the lights on. That in light of loss of jobs in manufacturing that hasn't recovered since the recession, or the loss of jobs through coal connected with that, there are lots of people who are now maybe working at Walmart, driving 40 miles to get there, having to take a second job. So their resources are right at the edge in terms of just surviving. And what they're looking for are jobs that pay a living wage. Not unreasonable.
What I heard about was taxes, state taxes, local taxes, an aversion to both. The Republican candidate for governor had come out with this plan to abate school taxes. I sit on my school board, so I know the destruction that would have wreaked across all the 500 school districts in the state. But what was interesting was how clear it was to me that we, as a party, haven't done our work educating people about what cutting taxes at a state level results in on a local level. If you cut them at the state, they're going to go up on the local level, and they're going to go up 3 times over, right? Your municipal, your borough, and your county, and your school. All those taxes are going to go up to fill the gap. Or they're going to lose fundamental resources that they value, like your schools having a sports team, or your YMCA being able to serve the community because they have some tax abatement, the benefits that they enjoy in their community depend upon the relationship between state and local taxes. I wasn't able to conquer that because we haven't worked on that narrative. And it's unfortunate, but I can't tell you how many times people told me, how angry they were about the gas tax that Governor Wolf signed. And I said, but Governor Wolf didn't sign the gas tax. That was Governor Corbett. It was in it. You give them the information and they go, oh, well, he should have repealed it. Oh, okay. And you have them only so many minutes on the door, right? And the last thing you want to do is be telling people, oh, you don't know, right? But their perception that a Democrat passed the gas tax it's false. No alternative facts. That is false. It was in fact. And instead of going, oh, it's still blame the Democrat for not remedying it. So I think as a party, and I think in local work, we need to do our work better on that. And I don't know how we do that. That's something that our county party is working on, and I know Indiana is as well. But if we don't educate around that, about how this works, and civics education is great, but they're not voting in 8th grade, right? We need to do it with the populations that we serve. I don't know if we're going to be able to get ahead of that. And I think that is crucially important if we hope to be able to win seats in state seats like the 66th, or even win a congressional seat, is to really make sure people understand the pros and the cons of this legislation, what it means for us here, because that's not what we're spoon-fed from our incumbents. It's a great bill, and they never tell you the downside, and then years later you suffer the consequences.
So that brings to mind a question about the media.
Yeah.
And I would be interested to hear your reflections on media coverage of your campaigns, not just on something like property taxation, but just coverage of the horse race as well as the issues. How would you describe the media coverage of your campaigns this fall?
Interesting thing with that. First of all, the 15th district now crosses several different markets. Okay, so media here on television is served by Pittsburgh in this district, also Erie, part of Buffalo in some, and in some smaller markets, Center County and Johnstown. And what I found was that in the smaller markets, certainly Johnstown did a great job. I think I had a number of interviews on television with that, as well as coverage in the papers. Same thing in Center County, did a very nice job with that.
Altoona, I think, also had
Altoona also, that wasn't even my district now. Yeah, but they did meet up with me. And also the Bradford era did really well by me, and by the work that the Democrats and the indivisible groups were doing in that part. We heard never anything, of course, from Buffalo, and I didn't expect to. I was contacted by Erie, and I did an on-air interview that was broadcast in some of the northern districts. However, Pittsburgh, which covers a good portion of this, and actually it's Indiana, Armstrong, and Butler County is all in this district, all served by the Pittsburgh media outlets. Pittsburgh, one of the stations ran a big story towards the end of the campaign on Bibi Borio's race down in the 18th, I think, and identified her as the only woman running for a congressional seat in Western Pennsylvania. And we contacted them and said, wait, there's another, and this is your viewing area. We made multiple contacts. Lots of people tried, and we couldn't even get them to respond to us. So, mixed bag.
Yeah. Did you ask them to correct it?
Yes, I did.
Did they correct it?
They did not. They did not.
The degree of journalism has slipped precariously in the little pocket of Pennsylvania where I call home. It's no longer news. They get feeder stories from the AP or from, very rarely do I see anything from Fox or from Reuters, but they just run columns written by generally really conservative thinkers. We see a lot about religion, we see a lot about choice, we see a lot about guns in schools, like the narrative that we see showing up in our newspaper that you think should be covering news, where someone goes to a meeting and listens to both sides and then reports on what happened. we haven't seen in probably 15 years, which is a shame. And I know a number of the reporters, they're very kind people, but they come, they tape, sometimes they'll print an agenda. I've seen that happen, where they actually print the agenda of a school board meeting, but not what was decided or what was discussed. That's not news. That's right. So when it came to the election, that didn't change. It didn't. We didn't see a spike in articles about the election. But that's not. That's not only this year. That's what we've seen in these really, really small newspapers. They're just not hiring stringers to go out and do the journalism anymore. They're just getting articles. Now, on the flip side, if you send them a press release, sometimes they'll print it exactly as it's written, right? Depending on who's looking. But on the other, we couldn't. I mean, members of at the Democratic Party were writing letters to the editor. They wouldn't be published. Very conservative letters to the editor would show up on a routine basis by the same number of people, but you wouldn't see the alternative perspective. And that's a shame, but that's the nature of the editor of the paper, wants to publish what he wants to publish and doesn't. So it's, you also have social media, where some people have completely disconnected from the traditional sources of media anyway. So it's a challenge to figure out where your audiences are, to be able to take our message to them, that in our humble opinions, they aren't being adequately served by the representatives that they're choosing. But it also can't be a beat them over the head with it. It really has to be an education effort.
A couple of minutes we got left. I noticed that during the campaign, Chris Dush announced that he was term limiting himself and he would not be running in 2020.
He said that 3 times, to be clear. He said that the first time he ran, he said that the second time he ran, and he said that this time as well.
So, anyone interested in running in 2020 against term-limited Chris Dush?
Well,
what's the prospects for your campaigning in 2020?
It's a lot. It's a lot. After running for 2 congressionals, and then this was certainly a smaller footprint. It was not quite as taxing as it was to try to cover 16 counties. I don't know if I'm going to do that again. I am going to be very active, try to find the right person and help them do that, and keep making inroads to make sure that people are represented. Because I represent, part of my practice is the children that come through foster care. Life is not getting easier for a huge swath of our population. They are struggling, and the struggles are just increasing exponentially. You lay opioids on top of that, you lay poverty, you lay underemployment, right? We're getting our asses kicked. And to get people to realize that there might be a better way to do that, but it involves policy, which isn't terribly exciting when someone's struggling, right, to talk about policy. That's my mission over the next few years, is really to figure out how to do that better and get people to realize that it could be better if we start making better choices on a state level and maybe help improve their lives in these little rural places in Pennsylvania.
Susan, briefly.
Well, I don't live in Chris's district, so
2020 is kind of
someplace. But 2020, I am not in any place to make any decisions yet. I can tell you that I care intensely about these issues. I love this district. I love the people that I've come to know. And I actually, strangely, found myself really enjoying the process of campaigning, and I've got some solid ideas as well. That said, you're right, it takes a lot. 14 counties, multiple media markets, it takes a tremendous amount, and it is an uphill battle for us right now. So yeah, I'm making no commitments as far as what will happen in 2020. I have already, though, started working with multiple groups in terms of debriefing, strategizing, what can we learn, how do we move forward, and I fully anticipate remaining very active with that. And I could see myself actually working to recruit talented people to move forward into it and supporting them, but I'm not ruling anything out one way or the other.
All right, we'll leave it there. I'm David Loomis. I am Emeritus Professor of Journalism at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. This has been the HawkEye interview, our first, dealing with local politics. And I'd like to thank our 2 guests, Susan Boser, professor of sociology at IUP, and Kerith Strano Taylor, domestic law attorney in Brookville. Also like to thank the IUP TV crew and the IUP Com Media Department for allowing us to use their facilities today. Also HawkEye videographer Alan Craigie of AGC Productions. And on behalf of the HawkEye, I'm David Loomis, editor of the HawkEye. Thanks for watching.